Welcome to Relationship Breakdown Part 2 of the Wang Leehom and Jinglei drama. Part 1 covered the news of the drama, hopefully in a neutral manner. Part 2 is about my reactions, and the upcoming Part 3 is a relationship breakdown. So let's get into it with Part 2, my reactions. My reaction from a relationship team perspective is that this entire drama was the result of a failed relationship effort. Together, they both failed. Failing to manage a relationship properly, which really means to maintain equilibrium in the relationship, can be incredibly costly, as this incident demonstrates. And that's why it's so incredibly important to know when things are out of equilibrium, when conflict is arising, and how to handle that conflict with a broad array of relationship tactics and skills. It's not easy, as conflict and failures can come from many different directions: violating boundaries, underperforming in your designated role, or being deficient in the broad range of relationship skills needed to communicate and reconcile needs and values in a relationship as the relationship evolves over time. But that's where this channel comes in, to help give clarity in the problems and help equip you with the broad array of skills and tactics for better relationship outcomes. We'll dive into some of those tactics in Part 3. So keep watching, and before you forget, hit that like and subscribe button. As you watch, feel free to leave a comment and we can have a deeper dialogue. Now, with Part 2, I'll focus a little bit more on my reaction to them individually, which is that each of them is likely honestly sharing their own perspective and not lying in their own minds. Though if there are lies, it's probably in their modified definition of terms like what exactly constitutes cheating, as an example. But how valid are their claims or defenses? I'll evaluate each of their points for credibility and then give my verdict for who won the public argument. The caveat, though, is that who wins this type of public argument isn't as important as whether each of them individually maxed out on what they could have done to salvage the relationship. With that in mind, it's still fun, highly entertaining to weigh in on who was right and who was wrong. On Jinglei's public post, which was the final output of the failed relationship, there were a number of points she made, and I'll give my take of her believability on a few of them to start. First, she claimed the relationship felt lopsided. She invested heavily into the relationship, bearing 3 children, spending most of the time during marriage either being pregnant, nursing the babies, or going through body changes. For Leehom to, at this point, jump ship, especially when her top ask is a harmonious family feels like a poor reciprocation for her efforts and sacrifices. One can say Leehom did a good job using money to solve some of those problems, but it's clear there's a mismatch between what she gave and what she feels she got from the relationship. It's an entirely valid point of view that helps explain her resentment. Second, she talked about women in society at large losing a ton of relationship leverage when they choose to become moms, and when, in the face of abuse or infidelity by the husband, they have little leverage to hold husbands accountable or demand some form of payback. This is true, and she's smart to call out the overall trend, not just think of her own incident. This helped make it a relatable point in society at large, especially among many moms out there. She did a good job adding credibility to herself this way. I will note, though, that society at large is changing very quickly. In my view, there's been no better time to be a woman than now, perhaps starting with a generation of women a decade younger than Jinglei, but we can discuss that another day. Third point, she makes a point to self-advocate when it comes to ownership of money. She reveals she compromised and signed a prenup, but clarified and advocated for herself that after marriage, finances are jointly earned. Instead, what happened was Leehom's parents controlled and prevented him, and in some cases her, from using money as they wished. This instigated fights between Jinglei and Wang's mom. I believe Leehom stayed silent on these matters and let Jinglei be the bad one. Jinglei also countered, claiming she wasn't the overly lavish type either, so why the need to override her access and exclude her from money that might technically belong to the marriage. From the angle of the marriage as highest priority over individual sides of the family, if finances are earned during marriage, that money does belong to the married pair. If Leehom, representing the married pair, yielded the money to his own parents to set boundaries on without Jinglei's approval, well, that's a one-sided decision that doesn't sound like Leehom advocated as a team player for the marriage. The parents might only have say with Leehom's okay for money earned prior to marriage on things like, for example, royalties on songs produced prior to marriage, but money earned after marriage is a decision for the married couple to make as a team, not individually, and not for Wang's parents. Unfortunately, it seemed that Jinglei took the blame for the conflicts around money when, based on marriage being the priority, it seems Leehom should be the one to be blamed for not standing up for the marriage. I think Jinglei makes a fair point here as well that helps explain her resentment. She shouldn't have to go through obstacles to get what she's legally entitled to and what is fair. It should just be understood by all without elements of mistrust, and Leehom not advocating also was not helpful. Her fourth point was on Leehom's selfishness, which was ultimately what triggered the public post roasting Leehom. She describes her own feeling of being used as a shield, taking the hit many times for the team, coming across as the devil so that Leehom could benefit as the angel. Further, she generally biased toward being super protective of him, yet when she asked for reciprocation upon divorce announcement, he didn't keep his word, letting rumors blaming her for the divorce to continue circulating without comment, while on rumors blaming him for the divorce by cheating, he not only defended but threatened to pursue legal action for defamation. On this point, it feels very unfair to Jinglei. It definitely feels like a double standard, and I can understand her frustration, especially if she's upheld her end of the bargain. Going into the details, Leehom actually rejected Jinglei's initial ask to comment and deny rumors that put the divorce blame on Jinglei, citing the public stance he already gave of not commenting about the divorce. To then go around and renege on that promise just to defend himself feels a bit of a selfish dick move. And then to say no further comment immediately after that, well, that's a real big dick move, squeezing his defense in before putting the dispute on freeze. My only clarifying question is, did Jinglei give any warning to Leehom before blasting him publicly? I understand she probably didn't feel heard, gave him too many second chances, and by this time, they were divorced, and so she probably had no vested interest in keeping quiet. But if she did decide to give him yet another second chance, there was a moment here where she could have reached out to Leehom to de-escalate and prevent this incident from blowing up. But again, I can understand if she didn't. Leehom, by this point, lost too much relationship trust and leverage to earn that benefit of the doubt in that moment. So the crisis detonated. This is what happens when relationship equilibrium is not maintained. The cost can be monumental. On these first 4 points, Jinglei did a fair job sharing her point of view. The problem was an imbalance in the give and take of a relationship, one in which she as a full-time mom unfairly had very little relationship leverage. And when it came to money that rightfully belonged to the married couple, she was humiliated and had assets taken away by Leehom's side of the family. And Leehom didn't do anything in response to advocate for the marriage and for her. That lack of responsibility for the team, combined with potential violation of money boundaries, plus selfishness, erupted in the form of her public post. From my relationship framework perspective, it makes sense and adequately explains her growing resentment. For her, the relationship loops did not feel to be properly reciprocated, boundaries potentially violated, and skill sets on empathy potentially deficient, leading to resentment and a buildup toward eventual relationship implosion. The fact that her action was premeditated over a long period of time, even Leehom father says this, and was not done on impulse, lends even greater credibility to this explanation of relationship resentment build up. We see that Jinglei doesn't even talk about the details of cheating and underperformance as a dad until the later paragraphs of her post. On being an absent father, Jinglei's perspective is likely even more credible as she is the one in charge of the kids and has domain authority. Surprisingly, it wasn't even a large section in her post at all, just a very small paragraph. On cheating, she recounts numerous specific examples that it's difficult to believe that they were all just made up. There were numerous examples at the time her pregnancy and marriage were announced, and there are numerous examples throughout marriage. While not definitive proof, one can imagine that with so many examples and the fact that he's a celebrity with easy access everywhere, the risk is high, and credibility here would tend to lean toward Jinglei's point of view. It's possible she misinterpreted and was mistaken or overreacted on some of these accusations, but overall, her credibility here is strong in this first post. Solid A. Of course, trust is something that is assessed over multiple cycles, so we'll reassess after her next response. And please note again that the key question from a relationship perspective isn't who won. It's about utilizing the broad range of skills and tactics available to work it out. On Leehom's father stepping in, it was cute but not needed and really unnecessary for a grown man's father to help mediate. This is a conflict between Jinglei and Leehom, two consenting adults in a relationship with the family, and they need to sort it out directly with each other. It seems Leehom may have wanted someone to help defend himself publicly, so obviously someone from his own side would be willing to speak out, particularly his dad. But everyone knows that that's a very biased perspective and neglects the full picture. It's interesting to hear, but not very helpful in resolving the conflict and coming to a more holistic understanding of the relationship dynamic. It also feels like Leehom might be hiding behind his dad, and this decreases Leehom's credibility. On Leehom's first public response, his first clarification was, "I can say with certainty that I was not unfaithful in our marriage." Okay, let's take a moment to acknowledge that possibility. Despite Jinglei's claims, it is possible that in each of these cases, there was no actual violation of their marriage boundaries, in that Jinglei could have been mistaken or overreacted. But with Leehom merely asserting his point of view without supporting points, we are left trying to think through possibilities on our own for how Jinglei might have been wrong. Admittedly, it may not have been the right time or place for making those supporting points, but it just leaves his assertion open to attack. But let's just consider for a moment the possibility of no cheating and that Jinglei was too sensitive. What might that look like? Well, take Jinglei's earlier claim. Had she known Leehom would want to go have his single life after she bore 3 kids, she wouldn't have agreed to the marriage. Well, guess what? Leehom's version would look like this. Had he known she would have been so sensitive about his hanging out with friends who were just friends, he also wouldn't have agreed to marriage. So we should be open-minded to consider the possibilities on both sides. Leehom's next assertion was that the first conversation they had, probably recorded conversation, was in 2011 when she was 26, not underage at 16. He claims she even called him stranger to suggest they were newly getting to know each other. I don't know about you, but usually when you are flirting and calling someone a stranger, it's because you're being sarcastic, especially to guys who slept with you and never called you. In this case, it seems like it was years. But let's assume his point was valid. If true, how do we reconcile what she said with what he said? If Jinglei said they met, I believe backstage at 16, did they not have a first conversation at that time? What was the extent of their earlier interaction at 16? Was that a fling thing or just a group getting to know each other thing? Whatever the case is, there are a few open questions, and my assessment of his credibility has not really gone up from this second assertion. His next comment about being frightened to have to marry Jinglei that very same day they argued about pregnancy and what to do about it, seemed like an honest answer from his point of view, but did seem to hint at a bit of lack of empathy. He described Jinglei as agitated and claims there's recordings of Jinglei threatening to disappear if he doesn't marry her. For someone with more empathy, I don't think they would even take note whether or not that statement was on record or not. With empathy, one should be able to understand that Jinglei would be emotionally triggered to a degree that is proportionate to the surprise factor she is experiencing, which is very high. You're talking about 9 months of body changes and creation of a baby you have to take care of for life. So that point doesn't rub me the right way and makes me feel he just doesn't get the holistic perspective and doesn't sufficiently empathize with the other side of this relationship. Fourth, after commenting about going to therapy sessions, he then referred to his wife as Nishiharu Michiko, Jinglei's Japanese name. What's the point of this? I understand when they first met, possibly when she was 16, her name was the Japanese one, but she long changed her name and used the Chinese one. And long after that, into marriage, why is Leehom now referring to Jinglei as Nishiharu Michiko? Something feels fishy here, and so I think this decreases credibility points in my mind yet again. Fifth, on divorce details, I think he did a good job here actually. He shared screenshots of the divorce papers and the amounts indicating that Jinglei did indeed get plenty from the divorce settlement, contrary to the perception that Jinglei created from her initial post that she would not be humiliated in any way to get money from the Wang family. Let's dive into it. My understanding was that it was $20 million broken down as $6 million, which is 50% of the $12 million LA house, plus $7.8 million, which is 50% of $15.67 million in stock, plus a remaining $6 million or so, probably from some other joint accounts and other costs like home and child caring expenses. So total, that's $20 million. This was a great deal for Jinglei. Compared to the market rate for any other guy she would marry and then divorce, she'd probably only get money in the mere 6-figure range, maybe 100, maybe up to 500K. But by having been married to a celebrity, she elevated the amount into the millions. So that's no joke in terms of amount compared to, let's say, the market rate for men. If you were to compare to her next wealthiest option, it's possible she could have gone into the millions divorcing another rich guy, but you gotta give it the probability as being a little bit lower. Overall, let's just say she got a large amount and netted out very well. So how do we reconcile this large amount in divorce money with what Jinglei claimed earlier that she wouldn't be humiliated in any way to get money from him to pay for living expenses, even though she deserves it? She can still raise the children through her own hard work. To clarify, Jinglei is referring to alimony. Traditionally, after a marriage, a court might order the guy to pay alimony, a portion of his income going forward, in order to support the wife and the kids. But Jinglei wasn't going to get alimony anyway. Here are the requirements. 1. You relied on your spouse for financial support. Yeah, that's true. But 2, you don't have sufficient property, including marital property, to provide for your needs. And here she got plenty. And then 3, you are unable to support yourself through work, or you cannot work due to caring for a child whose condition makes it inappropriate for you to work. That's a little bit questionable. So this comment about being humiliated by taking Leehom's alimony is just not true, as she was never going to get it in the first place. The $20 million divorce money is plenty. Jinglei does claim that this is money she was entitled to. That's true. Money earned after a divorce is owned jointly by a couple. The prenup that was signed earlier protects all the money that Leehom earned prior to 2013. That money is carved out specifically for Leehom. Anything else after that is roughly 50-50. So you can imagine the pair probably earned about $40 million from 2013 to 2020, and half of that legally goes to Jinglei. Overall, Leehom gets solid credibility in his first post when it comes to the finance topic of the divorce. But as written, there's limited credibility relative to Jinglei's when it comes to his first 4 points. Not cheating, there's no supporting points. Not doing anything questionable underage, his mention of a stranger, if anything, makes me believe the other side more. Being forced to marry a crazy, threatening girl, he himself appeared to bias too much in his own perspective, in my view, and not have enough empathy. And then flip-flopping on her Chinese and Japanese name to an unclear intent, which there doesn't seem to be a valid reason to do this. The overall credibility score I give is a B-. Jinglei's rebuttal. As we know, the saga stayed public and grew more dramatic. Jinglei exposed more details in her rebuttal. Generally, these supporting points aren't definitive proof, and there are certainly holes. But Jinglei continues to tell a story consistent with her earlier post, one of growing disappointment and resentment. The supporting points she adds are specific details, and this adds more to credibility, as it's difficult to maintain a story long-term and publicly by making up stories. It doesn't mean they are actually true, and we'll go through each of these points, calling out the holes as well, but it stresses the point that there did seem to be high risk of cheating in their marriage. From a credibility perspective, let's take a look at her points. First, Jinglei responds to Yumi's social media post where Yumi tried to defend herself, filing a police report for defamation when someone accused her of being involved. Jinglei, in a daring and challenging manner, responded with, "Please give me the police's contact details. I will provide the evidence. Thank you." Not definitive proof, but convincing. If she were bluffing, she did a really good job of it. Second, Jinglei shares a screenshot of Yumi's WhatsApp message. The claim is Yumi did in fact continue talking to Leehom after deleting their WeChat contact info. But this is far from incriminating evidence. Is this in fact Yumi Bai in the photo? I mean, I get spam messages on WhatsApp all the time from random accounts with attractive female profile photos. It could just be spam. Further, the actual message of, "Hi, how are you?" does not indicate cheating. And the fact that it was unread does not mean Leehom ever actually opened it, read it, and replied. Did the conversation continue? We don't know. But broadly speaking, I have a feeling Jinglei isn't the type to overreact and be mistaken, as she stayed quiet for a long time and likely collected evidence over that long period of time. And her writing appears organized, calm, and collected, and consistent. I'd probably give Jinglei the benefit of the doubt that she probably fact-checked herself and triangulated among different data points to have a high level of conviction to make her claim using merely this screenshot. Third, Jinglei shares notes from their therapist. It's very shocking and provides a glimpse into some of the deeper problems they have, so they are really eye-opening. Given the public audience, I think it's high risk for her to make this up, so I kind of believe it. It's also very specific and potentially makes sense and could help explain. But I also want to point out some of the holes. They reference nicknames like Bobby and Sasha. Do they indeed refer to Leehom and Jinglei? We don't know for sure, but we do know therapists sometimes use nicknames to refer to patients to preserve client confidentiality. Also, therapist notes are usually protected by privacy laws and might be illegal to reveal publicly. So why are they public now? What does their therapist think of this? Could she potentially go to jail for doing something like this and exposing it publicly? Also, Bobby is not Leehom's English name. His English name is Alexander Wang. So there are a few questions here. Fourth, related to therapy, Jinglei claims she endured emotional abuse and gaslighting tactics from Leehom and revealed that their therapist diagnosed Leehom as having narcissistic personality disorder. Firstly, I want us as a society to move away from this word disorder. It's not a medical health condition here, but simply a relationship muscle or skill that hasn't been exercised much and is weak. resulting in selfish tendencies within the context of a relationship involving other people. Second, the claim does in fact feel credible. It's very specific and uses specialized therapy type language. I wouldn't expect someone who hadn't gone to therapy and hadn't experienced this diagnosis to make these specific claims. And when you combine it with other details out there, it starts to increase in credibility. Take a look at this photo of the birthday cake he got her for her birthday. It's Leehom being the star and Jinglei being the subservient one, sitting or kneeling down taking photos of him. Is this for real? Like, we're talking about her birthday here. Maybe a little bit narcissistic? I don't know, take a look. And of course, there was lack of empathy that I called out earlier in Leehom's reflection of how they transitioned from pregnancy to marriage, saying he was forced into marriage, he was very frightened, while labeling her as agitated. I don't think these terms are wrong technically, but they may not be fairly spending enough time or emphasis on acknowledging her perspective, given something as big as pregnancy that you're imposing on her. So we'll talk more about this in part 3, but generally empathy deficiency and all these points about emotional abuse, gaslighting, narcissism do feel credible when you start adding up these examples. Fifth, she shares a screenshot of Leehom's text trying to negotiate for her to stop her public rant and apologize in exchange for giving her the Taiwan house, which I believe is valued at $17 million. He hopes she can say her accusations were groundless, she was upset, and wasn't thinking clearly. This supporting point of the text screenshot from Leehom that Jinglei shares feels legitimate. It's timely with the right relevant details. This may very well be what Leehom is thinking from his perspective, but I think he's missing empathy here and not fully grasping what her motivation is and why she's trying to post publicly. And I believe her why is that she wasn't feeling heard or reciprocated in her relationship, and there was massive disequilibrium in the relationship. And at the end, she asked for protection from blame, and she didn't get it from Leehom. She felt insulted, neglected, and in some sense, scorned. So Leehom's offer just doesn't connect with Jinglei. It's insensitive and implies that Jinglei's a gold digger and is after the assets. If it wasn't clear already, she already got $20 million in divorce money at this point, including half the house in LA and half the value of stock holdings. What's more important to Jinglei is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing from the perspective of the relationship equilibrium. Jinglei writes in her final post on December 23rd that she declined the Taiwan house offer and stated, "Yes, an apology is very important because if a person cannot admit one's own problem and keeps blaming others for one's own mistakes, that person will never be willing to feel regret, change, nor correct themselves." This again is consistent with her claim of an imbalanced relationship, being scorned instead of respected, and him having selfish tendencies neglecting the team. And from a relationship perspective, you shouldn't do that to your teammates. You shouldn't treat your relationship partners, especially those who have invested heavily into the relationship, with such little empathy and such little respect and with such little reciprocation. It shouldn't get to this stage. It's relationship etiquette. You're supposed to exhibit empathy, recognize your actions can hurt your teammate, take ownership, apologize for the emotional friction caused, and where appropriate, apologize for wrongdoing. Because that skill of empathy and apology is exactly what she wants her kids to learn. Ethics of relationship management, and an important part of what this channel is about. We'll dive deeper into this in part 3. So to recap, Jinglei's fifth point here about the Taiwan house as a negotiating lever and her reaction to it is solid, timely evidence that clarifies what she really cares about, and her subsequent behavior to turn down the offer stays true to her values, which is teaching her kids the ethics of relationship management. On Leehom's second public response, He officially apologized and brought a lot of the drama to a close, and I'm glad he did it. I'm not saying he was at fault for all the accusations Jinglei made, and to be clear, Leehom also did not admit to wrongdoing for any of the accusations of cheating. He only apologized for not managing his marriage properly. I think that is an area very close to 100% that he should be taking ownership for. There's a broad array of concerns his marriage partner had, and it seems like he hadn't done anything about it for a long time. When it came to the final trigger for Jinglei's post, I feel like he was actually at fault here. He reneged on his promise to protect her and sided with opportunistically protecting himself. And I haven't heard any defense from Leehom's side for poorly handling the media rumors, and I do believe this was a mistake on his part and a very costly one. Jinglei, I felt, bore less of the fault here, relatively speaking. I think she may have yielded or accommodated his actions too much, perhaps not voicing up enough in earlier years. But she mentioned, by staying silent over time, it eventually led to her seeing disappointment in her kids' faces, and only then did she muster enough strength to self-advocate and speak out. Maybe she could have spoken up, maybe she could have drove conversation toward problem solving earlier on. But the driving force for this risk, both of cheating and underperforming, even of empathy deficiency, was on Leehom's side. And if the only thing Leehom did was throw more money at the problem and ignore, I do feel there was more he could have done. So an apology, as stated, of not managing his marriage properly felt very fitting. As we know, this failure to manage his marriage came at huge cost to Leehom's public image and career. It painted Leehom as being untrustworthy when it comes to managing relationships. And to be trustworthy in the public eye, which in itself is a form of a relationship, one must have integrity. That means showing consistency in all kinds of relationships. Personal relationships managed well would translate into trusting that a relationship with the public is managed well as well. However, a roasting in public of this magnitude is enough to deem him as untrustworthy to the public eye. He must show credibility in his own personal relationship that he's done the right ethical thing, which is to preserve its equilibrium, before he can earn a relationship with the public again. It's a deep but necessary moment for Leehom to grow, to stop being selfish and seeing things only from his own point of view, to give more weight to other people's perspective, and to be more empathetic. On his own, Leehom is very successful individually, but being in a relationship, being a team player, is a whole other set of skills. Overall, Leehom's credibility score still stands at a B-. Basically, Jinglei's A- versus Leehom's B- means that Jinglei won, and that increased credibility is what pressured Leehom to surrender. Not completely, but at least for mismanaging his marriage. But man, from here, there's still a lot more relationship repair to do, which we'll chat about in part 3. What do you think? Did you share any of the reactions I had or had different ones? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to learn more about relationship skills, stay tuned for part 3, where we'll do a relationship breakdown and zone in on the risks of the relationship and recommend a few skills they can each level up on to have better shot at relationship outcomes. Until next time.